One day, I woke up in an arid desert. I turned my head to the left and found an abandoned old house. When I turned to the right, I saw a group of men leaving together in the distance. Realizing that I was alone, I shouted at them. Some of them heard me, looked at me while smiling, and then kept walking away. I screamed until I lost my breath, and because I was exhausted, I gave up. I entered the house because the heat was unbearable. It was warm inside, but I was still sweating. I found a vintage television, a laptop, and a smartphone. I turned the TV on, and surprisingly, it worked, even though there was no power supply. I left the news channel on, then moved to another room that seemed like a kitchen because it had a refrigerator filled with cold, fresh fruits and vegetables. After drinking a liter of water, I took 2 eggs, fried them, and ate them while watching TV. I had some peaches, and then noticed my clothes. I realized I was wearing a colorful t-shirt and sporty pants, similar to what kids wear. I didn't mind because they were comfortable. I was depressed at first, but I eventually got used to the loneliness. A few days later, I saw a man passing by, and without hesitation, I invited him to dinner because I was overjoyed to see another human being. However, he refused. Then I offered him a cup of tea with a slice of lemon, but he still declined. He acted as though he was in a rush and quickly left. I couldn't follow him because he vanished in an instant, leaving no footprints behind and with no roads in sight. I was disappointed and full of rage because that had happened to me many times. Thus, I decided to force the next person to stay and answer the questions that kept me awake at night. I took a stick and waited for the next man. After hours, a man finally approached me. I beat him, asking, "Where did you come from?" He didn't reply. "Where are you going?" I yelled. He answered, "I don't know." I kept beating him and asking the same questions, and he kept giving me the same answer. Finally, I stopped because he was covered in blood, and I felt sympathy for him. Frustrated, I broke down and burst into tears. One day, when I was lying in the yard of my house, I saw something approaching me. It wasn't a human or an animal. It kept getting bigger and bigger. It was huge and made of giant pens. It launched one of them toward me, and it exploded next to me. I was terrified and ran away aimlessly. Suddenly, an elephant with wings appeared, throwing objects shaped like letters from its horns. The 2 monsters were fighting, and the scene was unbelievable. It felt like watching an episode of the anime Digimon. In the end, the elephant defeated the pen monster and asked me,
"Are you okay?"
I wasn't sure if the elephant was actually talking or if I was just hearing its voice in my head, but I replied, "Yes, I am." I returned home and prepared a cup of tea with a slice of lemon. Then I invited the elephant to join me. He laughed heartily and said, "I don't think that cup holds enough tea for me." I realized how foolish I had been, so I apologized and said, "I am in an arid desert, so there isn't sufficient water for you." Then I added, "By the way, how did you end up here?" He replied, "I don't know. I was in a red place, surrounded by flesh." I asked, "Flesh?" He said, "Yes, that's what it was." I stopped asking questions because nothing made sense to me after I saw electronic devices working without a power supply. He told me he wanted to stay in my yard. I replied, "Not for a long time." He laughed and asked, "Are you kicking me out?" I built a roof from palm leaves in the yard to protect him from the sunlight and prevent him from getting a sunstroke. He was good company since he was the only one who accepted my invitation. Every night we sit together in the yard, chatting while gazing at the bright stars. I told him about my earliest memory, playing in a room my parents used to store bags of wheat. I took a handful of wheat and put it into the gas pipe, then turned it on to see how the grains flew. I also told him about the happiest moment of my childhood when my father bought me a Sega Genesis. We used to call it Atari. I also mentioned the times I used to play basketball with a friend of mine at the neighborhood playground. A few days later, after my usual nap, I discovered that the elephant had disappeared. I felt depressed. Then I heard the sound of a monster, its body made of scrolls, and it wore a graduation hat. It threw big numbers at me. But fortunately, the elephant appeared, transformed into light, and blocked its attack with words. Not long after, a tattered monster emerged from the shadows, its clothes torn and filthy. The monster hurled dark fragments toward me, but the elephant stomped the ground, releasing a ripple of light woven from sentences. The radiant wave shattered the dark fragments in an instant. Then came the one in the lab robe, its face hidden behind a mask. The elephant charged again, but this monster was faster. It dodged and lunged at me, but the letters from the elephant's horns formed a barrier protecting me. The elephant finally caught it, and with a mighty swing of his trunk, he sent it flying into the distance. The last monster was the strangest of all. It looked like an insect, its body covered in a hard shell. It clicked and chirped, its voice a rapid, incomprehensible babble. It resembled my inspector, so I called it Insector. The elephant didn't even need to fight this one. He simply blew a gust of air from his trunk, and the insect monster was swept away. I thought the battles were over, but then I saw a monster that was unlike any I had faced before. It had 3 heads and many hands, and it didn't attack. It simply stood there, watching me with a quiet intensity. I was confused and afraid, but the elephant didn't move to fight it. Instead, he turned to me and said, "This one is different. It's not here to harm you. It's here to stay." The monster approached slowly, its many hands reaching out. I wanted to run, but the elephant stopped me. "This monster is not your enemy."
After that, the elephant told me it's time to say goodbye because you no longer have the passion to learn English. Then he left. I was devastated and his words were ambiguous. I thought about it for a while, then I remembered the weapons he used. That's when I realized he represented the passion I had for learning that language. However, I still want to learn it. I was annoyed by the 3-headed monster because he screamed every time he got hungry. I don't know why feeding him was such a difficult task, even though food was always available. After years, I succumbed to the disease of aging, but the monster took care of me. When I was visited by the angel of death, I wondered who would take care of him. He buried me well. I thought I was lonely in the desert before the grave. Now I know exactly what loneliness feels like. I cannot miss the 3-headed monster.
My name is Lemon. Do you want me to come to you?